highway after midnight felt like a thin line drawn through endless dark, the kind of dark that eats your headlights and gives nothing back, and Miles Carter liked it that way. At 43, with 19 years and a brown uniform, he knew the rhythm of quiet roads, the hum of a V8, the soft hiss of radio static when nothing urgent was moving, and he knew the shape of Red Creek country better than his own living room. But even he would later admit, if there had been a later, that something about this shift sat wrong from the start. The air, too, still for October. The smell of the creek riding farther than usual. The coyotes shut up like they were waiting for someone else to speak first. Joey Salazar rode shotgun, 28 and sharp as a tack, a little too eager for overtime, and a little too proud of the new boots his wife had found on sale, scribbling plate numbers from a speed trap an hour earlier, while teasing Miles about his ancient thermos and the way he still called the radio the box, and the box, like it heard its cue, crackled. A dry voice from Dispatch 9 saying Unit 3-4, check in. Miles thumbed the mic, steady as ever 3-4 at mile marker 67, eastbound on 17. All quiet, and the carrier hissed, popped, died. A dropout they both blamed on the low cut where the road slid toward Red Creek Bridge, a place the county called infrastructure, and folks called a bad idea because the fog there could climb up from the water and hang over the asphalt like a living thing. They rolled with windows down the last mile to shake off the drowse, felt the cool damp push in, smelled algae and iron and something like burned oil. And when the bridge rails showed up in the beams, ghost pale and flecked with rust, Miles lifted off the gas because there were lights ahead, hazards blinking slow, a metronome in the dark, and there, nosed half onto the shoulder just past the crown, sat an old tan sedan with a back left tire laced in shreds and the driver door wide. Miles angled their cruiser 3/4 behind it and hit the overheads, blue and red pouring across wet rail and water, and the scene snapped sharp. No driver in the seat, no keys, no purse, no wallet, just a cigarette still twisting smoke in the ashtray, and a rag tucked under the spare like someone had started a job and never finished. Joey stepped out first, hand on his light, voice easy sheriff's office. Hello, and got only river noise back, a thick, slow rush that made normal silence sound loud. Miles checked the trunk seam, shut tight, brushed a finger along the keyhole, and felt grit like someone had dusted it on purpose. Raised his light to the rail where a smear, dark and dull, clung just below the top strip, wet but not fresh. And before he could make a guess, they both heard the footfalls, not running, not even careful, but patient, like a man stepping slat to slat on a porch. And Joey swung his beam into the ditch on the north side where the weeds are high, and the slope breaks quick toward the pylons, and a shape walked out of the dark. Tall, brimmed hat, rain jacket even though there was no rain, hands empty, face in shadow until the light cut across the mouth and found a smile that didn't fit any part of the scene. Car trouble? Joey asked, keeping it calm, and the man said tire, as if the word were new to him, and phone died, and walked for help. And Miles, who had seen more lies than sunrise, felt the hair along his collar rise because the voice had no shake in it, no complaint, no apology, just a flat line that said nothing and asked for nothing. Step over here where I can see your hands, Miles said, not unkind, and the man did, slow, careful, as if matching a rhythm only he could hear. The radio spit again, Unit 3-4, status garbled enough that the syllables lost their edges, and when Miles brought the mic up, the signal died entirely, a clean cut, like a switch thrown. We'll get you a tow, Joey offered, eyes on the man's fingers, and the man tilted his head, the smile hanging there without moving, and said, that won't be necessary, which made no sense because they were on a bridge with a dead tire. And then, almost gentle, you fellows ever notice how quiet it gets right here? And Miles felt a heat run through his gut because yes, He had, and the quiet was heavier now, as if the water were sucking sound down. Back to the car, Miles told Joey without looking away, and Joey took 2 steps 3, angled to the cruiser's passenger door, and the man's face flattened. The smile turned off like a lamp, and everything happened at once. A second set of headlights flared at the far end of the span, low and dark, rolling in without sound. A thud echoed under the bridge, not water metal and metal, deliberate. The tan sedan twitched like a hand had nudged it. Miles shifted, shoulders out to block the man and the car both. Thumbs stroked the holster's snap, and in the corner of his eye, he saw Joey reach for the radio, yanking it free as if a cord tied it to the dash. And the cord fought back, and the man said, still gentle, "Contain it," a word that made no sense until later. And then the dash cam, if anyone ever pulled it off the grid, would show light bouncing wild across steel, the brief shape of a brim, a hand, a cable line rising and falling like a snake across the rail, would show a gloved palm slapping the camera once, twice, and a smear like grease taking the frame to stack. By first light, the maintenance crew found Unit 3-4 idling neutral with both front doors open, overhead still spilling tired color across the creek. Radios dead, shotguns clipped tight in the rack, but the locks twisted like someone had leaned on them with something more than muscle. Joey's clipboard on the hood, with the last plate half written. Miles's thermos on the trunk, where it never should have been, warm enough to fog the lid. They called it in, voices small in the big air, and within 30 minutes, the bridge carried more people than it had seen in 10 years. Deputies stringing tape, the sheriff himself hard-eyed and gray at the temples. Guys in orange vests staring at the gouges of black rubber where 2 low cars had slid and bit. A tow driver scratching his neck and saying he didn't have orders for any sedan on this span. Never did. Not last night. Not ever. A diver in borrowed gear dropped off the downstream pylon and came back up shaking his head. Silt too deep. Current too thick. Nothing to see but beer cans and the ghost of a shopping cart. An old farmer from the north side leaned on his truck and told anyone who would listen that bridges were gates, and Red Creek took what it wanted, and a teenager on a bike whispered that everyone knew about lights in the water and the way sound died on the rails after midnight. The sheriff climbed into the cruiser and tried the radio himself, got only dead air and a faint hum like a wire burned on the inside, then climbed back out and looked down the long black ribbon of 17, like he might see 2 men walking toward him with coffee and jokes about false alarms. By noon, there were flyers on diner corkboards and questions at kitchen tables. Why both doors? Why the thermos? Why the clipboard? Why the locks bent on the rack? And none of it added up to anything but a hole. At sundown, somebody said a prayer out loud without being asked, and somebody else mentioned the old stories. And Freeport News sent a van and dragged a cable across the concrete until the sheriff waved them off. That night, the bridge went back to quiet except for a single patrol car parked dark on the shoulder, and a deputy nobody knew doing nothing anyone could see. Miles away, on a desk in a back room, a logbook page burned at the edges, curled slow as a leaf, froze with a date and a time and 2 names you could read through the singe. And when a tired clerk stacked it wrong at 2 in the morning, no one noticed, not until years later, when the road itself would unzip and spit up what it had been fed. For now, Red Creek Bridge kept the story like it kept the fog, holding it low and close, while the county learned to speak in present tense about 2 men who were no longer here and never should have left. The state crew came out with jackhammers and orange cones on a Monday morning, 24 years after Miles Carter and Joey Salazar rolled onto Red Creek Bridge for the last time, and the sound of steel teeth chewing through asphalt woke more ghosts than anyone expected. They were widening Route 17, laying new drainage, so spring floods wouldn't keep swallowing the shoulders. And the foreman cursed, when his men hit something solid under the blacktop, something that rang hollow instead of cracking. At first, they thought it was an old culvert pipe, maybe concrete poured in the 60s. But when the claw bucket scraped clean, the sun glanced off metal not meant to be there, a square lid bolted into a frame, edges sealed with tar that had hardened like stone. One of the younger workers whistled low, called it a bunker, and another spat, said he didn't want to be the one to open it. But men are curious, and the county inspector on site wanted the road clear, so they cut the bolts, levered the lid, and let daylight pour into a space no one had looked into for a generation. Inside was a compartment barely the size of a coffin. Dust and rust clung to everything, and the first thing lifted out was a shattered red dome of a patrol light bar. Wires frayed, lenses cracked, the kind deputies used in the 90s before the county upgraded to LED. Next came a backplate from a badge, number filed down but still showing faint scratches where it had once read 34. Then a charred scrap of paper, brittle as leaves in December. Someone had pressed it flat between two sheets of aluminum. The inspector held it up, squinted, and made out blackened lines of ink, smeared but legible enough to spell a date. October 13th, 1997. Night Carter and Salazar vanished. The find stopped work cold. The sheriff's office rolled up with tape and evidence bags. Reporters showed by evening, sniffing a story older than most of their interns. And in the middle of the circle, standing with her hands deep in a windbreaker, was Detective Ava Rourke, freshly transferred from the State Bureau and already neck-deep in boxes nobody else wanted to touch. She had asked for the file months earlier, after noticing the bridge case had sat unsolved longer than her whole career. A cold case whispered about, but never reopened. The sheriff wasn't keen, said resources were thin, but now with asphalt peeled back and history staring them down, he had no choice. Ava studied the objects as CSU laid them on a tarp. The light bar, the backplate, the scorched page. Her breath frosted in the autumn dusk. She'd been a child in 97, barely 9, when news of 2 deputies gone missing shook Red Creek County, and her father had locked the doors early every night that week, saying bridges don't lose men, men lose themselves. Now here she was, grown, trained, and staring at proof someone had meant for these things to stay hidden. You don't bury a patrol light unless you want it never found. She pulled the case file again that night in her motel room, flipping brittle reports and Polaroids. Photos of the cruiser idling with doors ajar, the clipboard with half a plate number scrawled, the thermos still warm on the trunk. Interviews with farmers and truckers who saw nothing but fog. Dispatch logs full of dropouts where radio check-ins should have been. The official theory had always been flight or foul play by unknowns, but the sheriff at the time leaned hard on unknowns, never naming names, never pressing angles. Ava traced the burn-curled page they'd pulled from the hidden compartment, lined it up with a report dated the same night, and saw it was once a logbook, maybe from dispatch, maybe from the deputies themselves. But someone had cut it out, blackened the edges, and entombed it. That wasn't accident. That was intent. She drove back to the bridge after midnight, parked where the asphalt still gaped like an open wound, and walked the span slow, boots crunching gravel. The creek below whispered steady, current strong after a week of rain. In the glow of her flashlight, the rails looked the same as in the old photos. Paint peeling, rust streaks like dried blood. She tried to picture Carter, 19 years on the job, steady hand, no reason to vanish. Joey, young, eager, wife waiting. Their absence had left a hole in the county's memory, so wide it turned into folklore. Folks whispered Red Creek was cursed, that the water kept what it wanted, that bridges could be gates. But Ava didn't believe in curses. She believed in men burying evidence in secret compartments. By dawn, she'd sketched a list. Who ordered the roadwork in 97? who had access to patrol equipment that could be stripped and hidden, who signed off on reports that never added up. At the top, she wrote one name she barely remembered from childhood whispers: Sheriff Darnell Pike. Dead 10 years, but still looming in stories. Pike had been the kind of lawman who smiled on camera and growled in private, who liked his county, quiet, and didn't mind cutting corners to keep it that way. His deputies called him Old Iron. His critics called him untouchable. And Ava had a hunch he knew exactly why 2 of his men never came home. The next morning, she pulled personnel rosters, traced who'd been on shift that night. 2 units unaccounted for in the logs. One listed as mechanical issue, the other as rerouted to county line. Neither had follow-up reports. And tucked into an old maintenance ledger at the county garage was a receipt for scrap metal, disposal dated October 14th, 1997, paid in cash, signed only with initials. RK, whoever RK was. They'd gotten rid of something big the morning after Carter and Salazar vanished. Ava circled the initials, leaned back, and felt the case open like a wound. Somebody had hidden the evidence under asphalt, sealed it tight, and left it to rot. But asphalt breaks, time cracks, and the dead don't stay buried forever. She thought of Carter's thermos, Joey's unfinished note, the drumbeat of hazard lights in the fog, and the way silence could sit heavier than sound. 24 years gone, and still the bridge whispered. She knew then the case was no longer cold. It was waiting. And she was the one who had finally stepped onto the road to listen. The county garage sat behind the fairgrounds like a forgotten barn. Cinder block walls stained the color of old nickels, and a roll-up door that rattled each time the wind pressed through the cottonwoods. Ava signed the log, clipped on a visitor tag, and followed the smell of diesel into a maze of tool carts and hanging hoses. She found the shop office half buried under paper, punch cards, oil order slips, hand-lettered notes about tire rotations from a decade nobody cared to sort. A man with a gray goatee and nicotine fingers looked up from a ledger. "You're not here for emissions," he said. "Detective Rourke," Ava replied, showing her badge. "I'm looking for records tied to a scrap disposal, October 14th, 97. Initials RK. The man stared for 3 beats, then pulled a toothpick from behind his ear. "That's Reuben Keaton. Keaton worked nights back then. Welded like a magician, drank like a sailor. Been retired 8 years. Lives out near County Lake if he didn't run off to Arkansas." He slid a clipboard across. "You won't find much." Sheriff Pike liked clean books. Ava copied the address, and the way the man said clean told her he meant the opposite. Outside, the morning sun was bright enough to sting. She sat in the unmarked Taurus and called dispatch. "Run Reuben Keaton. Current phone, priors, anything with the county after retirement." The operator put her on hold. Static and hold music crackled through the speaker, and for a moment, Ava watched a kid on a BMX jump the cracked curb as if the world didn't make a habit of swallowing people. The line clicked. "Keaton's got a landline on Willow Dam Road. No arrests. 1 noise complaint in 2016. Also a county contractor notation for equipment hauling for flood. Repair in 98. Authorized by Sheriff Pike. Copy," Ava said. "I'm en route." Willow Dam Road wound along a skinny reservoir fringed by cattails and sun-bleached dock planks. Keaton's place was a squat ranch house flanked by a sagging carport. A welding rig sat half disassembled in the weeds, hoses coiled like sleeping snakes. Keaton himself answered in a threadbare tee and work pants shiny with old grease. His eyes were bloodhound tired, but they sharpened at the sight of the badge. "Whatever this is," he said, "my welding days are over." "I'm not here for work," Ava said. "I'm here about Route 17, the night after Deputies Carter and Salazar went missing." The name Carter pulled a flinch through his jawline. He stepped back, then gestured to a porch chair. "You want the truth?" he said, lowering himself into the twin. "Depends if you'll still want it after you hear it." Ava let silence be permission. Keaton scratched his forearm, eyes on the reservoir, like words lived somewhere out on the water. "Pike called me," he said. 2 a.m. on the dot. Said we had a road hazard, buried in the wrong place. Side bring the hauler, no signatures, cash on the tailgate. I told him county jobs need tickets. He said this one needed obedience. When I rolled up by the bridge around 3, the fog was thick as milk. Pike was there with 2 of his boys and a man in a suit who never gave a name. They'd already cut a trench. Something heavy was sitting under a tarp in the bed of a city dump truck. He paused. Not a cruiser, not whole. Stripped parts. Light bar, radio guts, trunk liner. We drove to the garage. They told me to burn the serial plates and prep a drum. By sunup it was done. A drum, Ava said, thinking of the sealed steel under the salvage piles she'd seen in other counties. Where? Back of the yard, he said. Went out with scrap the next morning. Pike signed the gate himself, then told me to forget it. Paid me $500 and a bottle of Evan Williams. Keaton's voice thinned. Next week, I put in for leave. 2 months later, the county doc said my blood pressure would kill me if the hours didn't. I took the hint. Why are you telling me now? Ava asked. His eyes swung back to her. Because I thought secrecy kept me safe, and all it did was make me sick. Because I see those widows at the Ija and can't look at the flower shelf without thinking of coffins. And because I heard you pulled a lid from under asphalt, and the devil I served didn't bury things to be found. It was the most precise confession she'd heard in months, and it came with no grandstanding, no hero posture, just a man too tired to carry what wasn't his to begin with. Who was the suit? Ava asked. Tall, hair like a news anchor, shoes wrong for mud. Pike called him Mr. Charles once. Could have been a first name or a fake. He didn't talk to me. He talked to Pike like Pike worked for him. The air went still around them. Ava wrote the name anyway. Half names had a way of turning into whole ones if you kept turning the wheel. One more thing, Keaton said. There was a clipboard. Carter's. Pike flipped through it, tore a page, set it on the torch for half a breath, then sandwiched it between plates. Sighed, insurance, and smiled. Ava pictured the scorched log page pulled from the road compartment, and the scene between story and evidence clicked shut. She stood. We may need you on record. Keaton nodded like a man already surrendering. I figured. As she reached the Taurus, he called after her. Detective? She looked back. They didn't run. His voice caught. Don't let anyone write it like they ran. The drive back to town felt shorter. She stopped at the diner on the highway to scribble a timeline across a napkin. 10:13, 2:14 a.m. Last radio ping. 3 a.m. Keaton arrives. Pre-dawn, drum sealed. 10:14, scrap ticket with RK initials. She added Mr. Charles with a question mark and drew an arrow to Pike. The waitress topped her coffee and slid over a slice of pie without asking. You look like someone trying to wrestle an alligator, she said. Something like that, Ava answered. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She stepped outside into the wind. Rourke, static, then a voice pitched low, careful. You're picking at old stitches, the caller said. They bleed. Who is this? You want Carter and Salazar? Check the river pilings, north side. Low water shows what pride tried to hide. The line died. Ava stared at the screen until her reflection blurred, then dialed the dive team lead she'd flagged 2 days earlier. By sunset, generators thrummed at the bridge, casting white light across black water. The current was down from last week's rain, a mild shoulder rippling around the concrete pylons. Divers slipped into the creek with rope lines snaking from their belts. Ava stood on the catwalk with Sergeant Dean, watching beams strobe underwater like lightning trapped in glass. 10 minutes, nothing. 15, a diver's light fixed on the upstream face of the second pylon. He surfaced, spitting creek and excitement. "There's a recess," he called, like a void poured and then sealed. "I can feel a seam." They fed him a pry bar. 2 more divers braced themselves, boots planted against slick concrete and levered. Something popped with a dull metallic sigh, as if the bridge itself exhaled. When they hauled the panel up, river mud belched out, thick and black, a smell like pennies and rot rolling over the deck. Inside the cavity lay a metal case wrapped in oilskin. Even through grime, Ava could see a county property stencil ghosted on the steel. "CSU laid a tarp." Gloves snapped. They cut the oilskin, pried the latches, and opened a time vault of things that had no business in a bridge. A handheld radio handset with its cord severed. A plastic evidence bag with a deputy's penlight. A zippered leather folder stamped RCSD, and inside, a microcassette labeled Unit 209 to 1013th Dash. Breath tightened around the circle. Dean whistled low. "Thought Pike swore those cams never recorded." "Pike swore a lot," Ava said. She bagged the tape like a baptism. At the lab, an ancient transcriber coughed the cassette to life. Technicians crowded behind glass. Ava sat in the chair with headphones snug, heart beating in her throat. White noise, then the rough rumble of tires on planks. 2 voices, men, one older, one young. "Carter and Joey. Unit 209 on Red Creek," Carter said, steady. "Stop the stalled sedan. No plates. Occupied 1 male." Joey's voice came in lighter, trying to sound older than he was. "He says he's out of gas." A pause. The particular silence of someone realizing the scene doesn't match the story. Carter again, lower. "Back in the unit, Joe." Doors. Footsteps. A scrape like a flashlight against clothing. Another voice, unknown, smooth as a sales pitch. "Evening, gentlemen." Carter, "Evening. You got ID?" The smooth voice smiled without a face. "Don't need it. Sheriff's on his way." Joey, barely controlled. "At 2 in the morning?" The unknown voice chuckled. "He keeps." Flexible hours. Tires on gravel. Another vehicle pulling up. Then a voice Ava recognized from archival press clips and town parades. A voice that had once soothed the county like a warm hand on the shoulder. "Pike. Boys, appreciate you holding the fort." Carter didn't bend. "We called dispatch." The tape glitched, as if someone had palmed the microphone. Then Pike again, closer. "Let's keep this tidy. Mr. Charles doesn't like delays." Joey. "Who?" The smooth voice, amused now. "The one paying to keep your lights on." A scuffle. A grunt, metal striking metal. The tape cracked into static hard enough to sting, then came back thin, like sound traveling through cloth. Carter breathing hard. Joey, back up to the unit. A click, then the scrape of belts, the dull thud of something heavy placed on steel light bar, and a hiss like a torch catching. Pike's voice flattened. "You boys are loyal. I admire that. But loyalty's to the county, and the county's to me. Carter, the county's the law, not the man." Then a final sound, small but human in a way Ava would never forget. Joey whispering, "Please," the recording cut. The machine whirred to empty tape. Ava sat very still, the room shrinking to the weight of a cassette, no bigger than a matchbox. On the other side of the glass, the technician swallowed. "That's admissible," he said softly. "It's a ghost that names names." Ava took off the headphones and realized her hands were shaking. She bagged the cassette again, labeled it with her initials, time, date. As she stepped into the hall, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Markers don't save you. Rivers don't talk. Bridges do. She tucked the phone away and kept walking. The sheriff was waiting in her office doorway when she returned to the station, hair mussed, tie loose like he'd aged 5 years since morning. "Tell me you didn't find what I think you found," he said. Ava locked her jaw. "I found proof we've been living under a story written by a dead man." He closed the door behind them. "You know what happens if this goes wide without us ready? You don't just indict a legacy. You rearrange a whole county's myth. Then start rearranging," she said. He winced but didn't argue. "Chain of custody? Tight? Keaton? Willing." He rubbed his face. "And Mr. Charles?" "Not yet a surname," Ava said, "but I've got a silo of finance records with Pike's signatures and donations that smell like diesel and cash. He'll have a name by Thursday." The sheriff nodded, the kind of nod men give when a road has only one lane left. "You'll need protection." "I'll need daylight," she countered. "Protection comes from people seeing." He half smiled. "You're your father's daughter. He used to tell me sunlight is hell's worst allergy." For a second, the room warmed with memory, then cooled as reality settled. "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow we go to the day." Sleep didn't come. She drove instead, past the dark windows of Carter's old house, past the ball field where Joey once coached summer kids, past the quiet storefronts that still used their grandfather's names. At Red Creek Bridge, she parked again and walked to the midpoint, palms flat on the rail. The water whispered the same tune it had on every bad night since the county learned to tell itself lies. "They didn't run," she said into the wind, and it felt like an oath. On the way back to the car, a shadow detached from the pier where the light didn't reach. A man in a brimmed hat, shoulders narrow, hands empty. He lifted his chin as if in greeting, then pointed down toward the river's north bank, where a dark path tunneled through willow and hackberry, a path worn by feet that never walked in daylight. By the time Ava's flashlight swung back, the man was gone. She stood very still, listening to reeds shiver, and understood two things at once. She was not alone on this bridge, and the past had simply changed languages. In the morning, she would learn to speak it. The coroner's office was never meant to hold ghosts, but the walls seemed to know how anyway. Fluorescence hummed above, a tired, steady light that bleached everything into one pale color. Detective Ava Rourke leaned against a counter while Dr. Lynette Halliday, the county medical examiner, rolled open a stainless drawer with the kind of steady hands only decades in the job could give. "Don't expect bodies," Halliday said, "but bones. Sometimes they remember more than we want." Inside the tray lay fragments sealed in labeled bags, femur sections, a jaw hinge, 2 ribs eaten by rust. Pulled that morning from the recess in the Red Creek pylon, they'd been packed in silt for decades, wearing the story of water and time. Ava swallowed the dryness in her throat. "You can make a match?" Halliday tapped a chart with her pen. "Dental records are our best chance. Carter's wife insisted we keep his. Salazar's sister, too. The county barely had a budget in '97, but they filed those. Bless them." She lifted the jaw fragment against a photocopied chart. "Not Joey. This molar's capped Carter's dental file, notes the same." "And this rib?" "The fracture matches a line of duty break he reported 5 years before. I'd stake my license. This is Carter." The room felt heavier. Ava scribbled notes she already knew she'd remember without ink. Carter confirmed dead. No word yet on Joey. Halliday set down the rib gently. "You know what that means. Someone wanted one gone and the other erased. That doesn't happen by chance. Ava nodded, a stone in her chest. The tape gave us voices. Now we have remains. She zipped the notebook shut. Da can't ignore this anymore. She left the coroner's wing into a bright afternoon that seemed indecently normal. Cars passed, kids on bikes laughed near the library steps, and here she was carrying the certainty that men had been buried in steel and concrete while the county moved on, like it was bedtime story material. She drove straight to the records archive, an old brick annex that smelled of mold and copy toner. At the desk, an archivist named June wheeled out boxes from the Pike years. Inside were ledger books, sheriff's bulletins, donation receipts for community events that read like cover sheets for darker balances. Ava ran a finger down one column of handwritten entries. Each month carried notations for road maintenance, cash values too round, signed off by Pike himself. One entry the month after Carter and Salazar vanished reads simply, "Special bridge service $2,500. Paid." No vendor, no invoice. She photographed every page. Her mind kept hearing the man on the tape smooth, anonymous saying, "Mr. Charles doesn't like delays." Charles. It could be a first name, but now looking at the ledgers, she wondered if it was shorthand for something bigger. As she packed the boxes, her phone buzzed. Unknown number again. A text, short, "Stop. Water washes everything." She snapped a screenshot before it vanished. That evening she drove out to the scrapyard on County Line, the one that had changed hands twice since the 90s. The current owner, Elias Boone, met her at the gate, tall, soft-spoken, with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Detective," he said. Always wanted to meet one of Pike's successors. He loved his order. Ava flashed the warrant. "I need access to Section D. Back lots. Historical inquiry." Boone's smile didn't falter. "Oh, history's dangerous. Dig too deep. You might find out who pays for your lights." The lot was a graveyard of twisted rebar and sealed drums stacked like oversized soda cans. CSU pried one open at Ava's nod. The stench rolled out first, then damp cloth, then the unmistakable patch of a deputy's uniform sleeve. Mud crust flaked away to reveal embroidered thread still clinging to the letters RCSD. Another drum gave up a flashlight engraved with initials. J. S. Ava's breath caught, pulse hammering. Joey Salazar's light, swallowed for 2 decades and spat out when the weld finally gave. Boone stood back, arms crossed, voice mild as ever. "You've got your ghosts. Careful they don't follow you home." Ava glared. "You worked for Pike." Boone chuckled softly. "We all worked for Pike. Question is, who was Pike working for?" That night in her motel, Ava spread photographs across the bed. Carter's rib, Joey's flashlight, the scorched log page, the cassette. Each piece was a puzzle shard, and together they built a picture Pike had tried to smother. Men had disappeared, not by chance, but by design, with drums, welds, and water as accomplices. And behind Pike, there had been someone else, Charles, or whatever his real name was, smiling in the dark like bridges were gates, and silence could be currency. At 2 a.m., Ava woke to tapping on her window. Slow, deliberate, 3 knocks. She pulled the curtain in time to see nothing but the neon buzz of the motel, sign and fog crawling off the highway like a living thing. On the glass, faint and greasy, was a handprint too large to be her own. She didn't sleep again. Instead, she sat with Carter's file open, the words circling in her head. They didn't run. If she had to dig up every ledger, every drum, every ghost, she would prove it. And if the county wanted quiet roads, it would have to reckon with the noise of the truth first. The dawn broke pale and colorless, as if the sun itself was reluctant to shine on Red Creek. Detective Ava Rourke parked near the courthouse and stared at the building's aging stone facade, every window lined with shadows. Inside those walls, decades of decisions had been made, some lawful, others tainted. She carried 2 files under her arm, one with Carter's confirmed remains, the other with Joey Salazar's flashlight and drum evidence. Both felt heavier than paper had a right to. The district attorney, Miles Carver, was already in his office when she entered. His suit was immaculate, tie knotted so tightly it seemed to squeeze the color from his face. "Detective Rourke," he said, voice clipped. "I was told you've stirred up old ghosts." Ava laid the files on his desk. "Not ghosts, evidence. Pike's men didn't drown. They were buried, sealed, and left to rot." She slid the photos forward. Carter's rib, the embroidered sleeve, Joey's flashlight. Carver studied them with the detached calm of a man deciding which way the wind was blowing. "You realize," he said slowly, "the statute of limitations complicates certain charges." Ava leaned in. "Murder doesn't expire. Someone killed them, and someone else paid to keep it quiet." Carver's jaw tightened. "Careful. You're suggesting corruption inside a county office. That requires more than suspicion." Ava tapped the edge of the ledger photocopies. "Then explain the bridge payment with no vendor. Explain the recordings. Explain why a scrapyard owner knew the exact section of drums to hide them in." Carver closed the file and exhaled. "You're not wrong, Detective. But you're not safe either. Pike's ghost may be dead, but his friends aren't. Some of them write checks that keep this county standing." His eyes met hers, colder now. "If you push too hard, you'll find yourself reassigned or worse." She left his office with her stomach knotted tighter than the DA's tie. Outside, the courthouse steps buzzed with townsfolk running errands, chatting about weather, never knowing the rot that lay beneath their streets. Ava pulled her coat tighter and called Viga, her oldest confidant on the force. "I need a second pair of eyes," she said. "Meet me at the old bridge tonight." By dusk, fog crawled across the water, curling around the cracked guardrails. Viga stood with his hands jammed into his jacket, a thermos steaming in the chill air. "Hell of a place to meet," he muttered. Ava knelt near the pylon where the bone had been found. "This bridge has soaked up more lies than concrete should hold. Carter and Joey didn't drown. They were silenced. And now the silence is cracking." She showed him the text. "Stop. Water washes everything." Vega read it, jaw clenched. "That's a warning. Whoever sent it knows you're close." Ava's flashlight beam swept across the waterline. Something pale glimmered under the reeds. She waded in, boots filling with mud, and pulled free a plastic evidence bag weighed down with a stone. Inside was a cassette tape, warped by moisture but intact. Across the label, faded ink spelled, 97, confession. Her pulse spiked. Viga cursed softly. Someone wanted this found. Back at the precinct, the tech team dried the tape and spooled it carefully. The playback was warped, voices under static, but words crawled out clear enough to cut. He saw too much. Carter wouldn't bend. Joey followed, had to end it. Another voice caller, deeper, said, "Then bury them where the county forgets. Underwater, under steel. Mr. Charles doesn't forgive delays." The room fell silent except for the hiss of the tape. Viga shook his head slowly. Charles again. Whoever he was, he called the shots. Pike was just muscle. Ava felt a chill crawl her spine. The voice on the tape was smoother than Pike's gravel. Calculated, detached, dot at midnight. Ava drove back to her motel, tape still echoing in her mind. She found her door slightly ajar. Weapon drawn, she stepped inside. Nothing looked disturbed until she saw the mirror. Across the glass, traced in dust with a wet finger, were 4 words, "Bridges hold their dead." Her reflection stared back, pale, unblinking. She lowered her weapon, but not her guard. Someone had been inside. Someone who wanted her to know she wasn't just chasing ghosts, she was being watched. That night, Ava sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the evidence pinned across her motel wall. Carter's rib, Joey's sleeve, the ledger pages, the tape. Every piece whispered the same truth. This wasn't about two men who disappeared. It was about a system that had swallowed them whole. And if she didn't move fast, it might swallow her too. Rain pushed through Red Creek like a slow-moving wall the next morning, turning Main Street into a ribbon of gray. Ava Rourke nursed a burnt cup of motel coffee and replayed the cassette on her laptop through a cheap digitizer the Tex had left her. She looped a 15-second clip again and again. A harsh whisper, a chair scrape, then the calm voice steady as a metronome saying, "Then bury them where the county forgets." Underwater, under steel, Mr. Charles doesn't forgive delays. The consonants were clean, almost careful. The kind of tone a man used when people listened for a living. She called the only person in county government who had ever given her straight answers. Lorraine Huff at Public Works. Lorraine picked up on the second ring, cigarette already lit from the sound of her breath. "Detective, you're calling awful early. I need bridge permits and emergency work orders for Carter Bridge, and the mile markers around it," Ava said. All of 97 through 99. Anything with emergency or repair stamped on top. Lorraine chuckled without humor. "That'll be the year the river washed out half our culverts. Or that's what we told the papers." She paused, then lowered her voice. "Come in the side door. People get nervous when you ask for things that old." The Public Works basement smelled like wet paper and rust. Lorraine, white hair pinned with a pencil, led Ava to a rolling ladder and a bank of metal drawers that squealed when opened. "Here we go. Carter Bridge, emergency work October 97. She tapped a file with her knuckle. "Funny thing, there's no inspection photos. We always shoot photos. We even shot film in the 80s. But this," she spread the folder, "just invoices. And fast ones." Ava leaned over the pages. The bids were rubber-stamped from a single supplier, Linden Aggregate and Crane. The signatures? A deputy county engineer, dead 10 years, and a C. Linden countersign. Carver's predecessor had initialed the authorizations. And there, stapled to the back, was a handwritten note. "Poor ASAP, night crew only. Who's Linden?" Ava asked. Lorraine blew a thin stream of smoke toward the ceiling. "Charles Linden. Pours concrete for half the county. Donates to every campaign. Nice man at church. Shakes hands, remembers dog names. People call him Mr. Charles." She looked at Ava pointedly. "Sometimes the paperwork calls him that too." Ava photographed every page and asked for certified copies. Lorraine slipped them into a brown envelope with fingers that didn't quite stop shaking. "Careful," she said. "My pension doesn't like this kind of company." On her way out, Ava texted Vega. Linden Aggregate signed emergency pour at Bridge Week of Disappearance. Mr. Charles on tape might be Charles Linden. 3 dots appeared, disappeared then. Meet me at the south abutment at noon. Bring boots. The rain tapered to a mist by the time Ava parked along the muddy shoulder. Vega was already under the bridge, hood up, pointing at a seam in the concrete that looked wrong even to an untrained eye. "See it?" he said. "That line shouldn't be there. You pour an abutment. It's one sheet-no-cold joint through the lower third. This is a patch. Big one." Ava crouched, ran her knuckles along the damp surface. The seam ran like a scar, new concrete paler than the rest. Embedded in the edge, as if a worker got careless, was a broken stub of rebar and the corner of something, blackened plastic or paint. "Let's get ground-penetrating radar," she said. By late afternoon, a state engineer, called by a friend of a friend who didn't ask too many questions, dragged a clunky GPR sled across the span. The monitor showed gray layers that meant soil, dark bars that meant metal, and then beneath the patch, an irregular pocket. Void, the engineer said, tapping the screen. 4 feet by maybe 6. Something in there that isn't aggregate. What kind of something? Vega asked. The engineer shrugged. You don't want my guess in writing? Lorraine had warned it, and the engineer made them promise. No cruise, no news, not yet. Ava filed an emergency request with the state AG's office for a sealed warrant to core the patch. While she waited, she drove to Linden Aggregate and Crane. The yard stretched along a frontage road. Tidy in the way farms are tidy when someone walks them at dawn. Fresh-painted loaders idled in a neat line. Cement trucks sat under a corrugated awning, drums flecked with gray. The office was a double-wide wrapped in cedar. An American flag hung from the porch. Inside, the receptionist smiled with professional warmth that had nothing to do with the eyes. Mr. Linden is on a site visit, she said. He's very busy this week. I can wait. Ava said, you can make an appointment. Ava left a card with urgent scrawled across the top and walked the yard. She was almost back to her car when a voice behind her said, Detective Rourke. She turned. A man in his late 60s stood by a pallet of bagged mix. Tall, trim, hair the neat silver of a barber who takes pride. His hands were clean. His boots were not. His eyes were the color of wet steel. Charles Linden, he said, offering a hand as though they were at a ribbon cutting. Ava didn't take it. We found your name on emergency bridge pours from October '97. Linden smiled as if the weather had finally broken. We pour a lot of concrete in this county. Floods, frost heaves, trunks. He gestured toward the highway. Roads take a beating. Night crews. No inspection photos? Signature from a man who died 10 years ago. And a note that says Mr. Charles in quotes. You like nicknames in your paperwork? He didn't flinch. Some folks write how they talk. Do I need a lawyer for how people address me? Depends what's under that bridge. Ava took a step closer. You ever meet Deputy Carter Pike? Or Deputy Joey Salazar? 2 men who disappeared the week you poured that patch. A shadow, barely, crossed his face. Red Creek's always been a praying town, he said softly. People die when they should live. People live when they should die. Concrete's the only honest thing in the whole equation. It keeps what you give it. What did you give it? Ava asked. Strength, he said, and then smiled again. And tax revenue? He tipped an invisible hat. Detective. Her phone vibrated as she reached her car. Warrant approved. Midnight. A second buzz. Unknown number. Water washes everything. Stop. She screenshotted the threat, sent it to Vega, and typed back to the unknown number without thinking. Not this time. They returned to the bridge after midnight with a 2-man state crew and a coring rig mounted on a diesel flatbed. Floodlights cast hard shadows across the water. The drill bit into the patch with a low growl, white slurry, cooling at its edge. At 8 inches, the bit shivered. At 12, the operator killed the motor. Cavity, he said. They pried the core free. Cold air breathed from the hole, mineral and something else, sweet, rotten, old. Ava lowered a borescope, the little screen jittering with static until an image snapped into focus. A plastic drum lid wedged under the concrete, its rim cut, something stuffed into the gap fabric, dark with age. Open it, Ava said. They chipped the rim, eased the lid. The smell hit like a slap. Ava gagged behind her mask. Inside lay a soft bundle wrapped in a black bag, sealed with gray duct tape. The tape crumbled at a touch. When she peeled the plastic back, a badge stared up through slime-brown enamel, the county star, and beneath it, a forearm bone bound to a hand by a leather watch strap. The face of the watch had stopped at 2:17. Viga's voice was low, steady, as if saying it aloud pinned the world in place. Joey. They sealed the cavity, photographed everything, and watched the Aegir lock the drum and badge into a steel case. Ava stood against the guardrail until the floodlights cut and the river took the darkness. Back, the motel room door was still intact when she got there, which was how she knew something was wrong. She didn't need to see the flood of rainwater across the carpet to understand the window had been left open. On the bed lay a single item, a brand new sledgehammer, still tagged from the Linden yard. Taped to the handle was a note on a torn invoice, pour ASAP. Ava sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the hammer until the hum of the AC sounded like a thin screen. She took photos, bagged the note, and texted Viga. They were here at sunrise. The county woke to rumors. A reporter with a police scanner posted a blurry photo of the rig under the bridge. Comments multiplied like weeds. Lorraine texted one word careful and then didn't respond again. Carver called at 8:02 sharp. My office, he said, and hung up. He was waiting with a neat stack of printed headlines and a look that made his tie seem looser than yesterday. You used a state crew in my county without clearing my office, he said. You want to put me in handcuffs too? Ava set the bag with the watch on his desk. That stopped at 2:17. Joey's wife told me he wore it every shift. You going to tell her to clear it with you before she grieves? Carver stared at the bag for a long time, then looked at the window instead. You're making enemies with deep roots. Roots don't matter if the tree is rotten, Ava said. We have Linden on emergency pours the week they vanished. A void under his patch. A drum with a badge and bone below, and a tape with a Mr. Charles giving orders. How many dots do you need? He rubbed his eyes. Enough to stand up in court when half the jury goes to church with the man. He picked up the evidence bag with careful hands. I'll move for a sealed indictment on obstruction and tampering today. Murder will take time. Time is what they had, Ava said. 25 years of it. She left his office to find a thin man leaning against the hallway radiator, hat brim pulled low. He straightened as she approached. Detective Rourke, he said, voice papery. Name's Clayton Darnell. I poured for Linden in 97 night crew. I saw things. They sat on a bench by a vending machine, the fluorescent light making the man's skin look blue. Clayton's hands worried the brim of his cap until it creased. Mr. Charles, he didn't yell. Didn't need to. He'd stand with that little clipboard and point, and everybody moved. That week, we had a rush pour. No forms were set by day. We came at 1 in the morning. A truck was already under the bridge, tarps down. They lowered something into the abutment hole. Looked like a barrel. He swallowed. Smelled like the river and bad meat. Who else was there? Ava asked. Crew boss named Connie Reed. Foreman we called Shorty, though he wasn't. And a deputy I'd seen at football games, Ray Cole or Coley. He never got his hands dirty. Stood with Mr. Charles and smoked. When we finished, he took a sack of money. Sighed for the fund. Clayton's eyes darted to the exit. I shouldn't have told you. Mr. Charles finds out. He already knows you're scared, Ava said softly. Now he knows you can talk. She pressed her card into his hand. Stay where I can find you. I'll keep you breathing. He shuffled away like a man leaving confession and not quite absolved. Ava texted Viga, then drove to an address Clayton had given her for Connie Reed. A narrow house by the tracks, windows boarded from the inside. A dog barked once, then went quiet. Nobody answered her knock. She was turning back to the car when a pickup eased up the block and stopped just long enough for her to see the driver, Charles Linden. He didn't look at her. He studied the house, a small smile at the corner of his mouth, then rolled away. That night, Ava moved out of the motel. She didn't tell Viga where she was going. She didn't tell herself either until the car was already on the state road. 40 minutes later, on a dirt lane lined with pecans, she parked beneath the dark bulk of a grain elevator that hadn't loaded a car in years. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "You won't find me at church." "Then where?" She typed, but the bubbles never returned. She killed the engine and listened to the quiet. A train horn moaned somewhere to the west. The elevator creaked, metal cooling in the evening air. She slid out, gun holstered but ready, and rounded the corner toward the loading bay. A light burned in a small office above the catwalks, one old bulb, jaundiced and steady. A cord hung down to a ground floor breaker box, propped open with a hammer. Someone wanted the light on. Someone wanted her to see Dot inside. The office smelled of mouse droppings and dust. A single corkboard covered the wall. Ava stood very still. Tacked to the board were photographs cut from yearbooks and newspaper clippings. Deputies at parades, deputies at funerals, deputies shaking hands. In the center, circled in red pencil, were two faces: Carter Pike and Joey Salazar, newly pinned at the edge. Her own academy photo, younger, hair longer, eyes less tired. A string ran from her picture to a Polaroid of Carter at a cookout, then to a photo of a concrete truck under floodlights. 3 names were printed in block letters beneath. C. Lyndon R. Cole. C. Reed. A floorboard whispered behind her. Ava spun. A man stood in the doorway at the top of the stair, hat low, jaw set. He wasn't Lyndon. He was leaner, hungrier. He held up something that caught the yellow light. Her motel room. "Key. Mr. Charles keeps records," he said in a voice that felt like gravel sliding down a pipe. "But he doesn't get his hands dirty. Some of us do." Iva's hand moved to her holster, slow as weather. "And your name?" she asked, keeping her voice even. The man smiled with half his mouth. "Closer than you think." He flicked the key into the dust and stepped back into the dark. Boot heels fading down the stairs. Ava stood alone in the hum of the old bulb, heart thudding so loud the corkboard seemed to shake. She picked up the motel key with 2 fingers, slid it into a bag, then pulled the Polaroid of the night pour and folded it into her pocket. When she turned off the breaker, the whole elevator sighed. Back in the car, she stared at the cracked windshield and counted her breaths until they were slow. She could wait for warrants. She could wait for Carver to decide how much Justice Red Creek could afford before donors got nervous. Or she could do what Carter and Joey had done, step where the line was thin. She texted Viga 1 sentence. "It's Lyndon, Cole, Connie Reed, and someone who likes to be closer. 3 dots. Where are you?" She typed, deleted, then wrote the truth that mattered. Not done. Fog rolled back into Red Creek with the stubborn weight of memory, clinging to the bridge, the courthouse, the rows of houses where curtains stayed half-drawn. Detective Ava Rourke hadn't slept in 2 nights, and the world around her seemed just a shade unreal. She drove slowly past Linden Aggregates' yard at dawn, noting the trucks lined up neat as soldiers, their drones streaked with dried concrete. The place looked ordinary, but every surface hummed with the knowledge of what she had seen under the bridge, the cavity, the bones, the watch that had stopped at 2:17. Viga met her at the diner on Main, sliding into the booth with a grim face and 2 coffees. "You look like hell," he muttered. Ava didn't bother with small talk. She laid the Polaroid from the corkboard between them. It showed the concrete truck under floodlights, men like shadows standing nearby. "This was pinned up with Carter, Joey, and me," she said. "Someone wants me to know I'm next." Viga traced a finger along the edge of the photograph. "That's Cole," he said at last. "Ray Cole. Used to be Pike's right hand." Retired before you came up. He still lives out by the river. Folks say he fishes, keeps to himself. He paused. And Connie Reed foreman on a lot of night jobs. Disappeared around 2005. Nobody looked too hard. Ava leaned back, exhaustion sharpening her voice. Cole was there when Carter and Joey were sealed in. If Lyndon is Mr. Charles, Cole was his deputy. That means at least 2 men alive who can be charged. Viga shook his head. If you can keep them breathing long enough. These aren't just old men with guilty consciences. They've had decades to build fences. Before Ava could answer, her phone buzzed. Unknown number again. South Spillway. Noon. Alone. She showed Viga. Trap, he said immediately. They want you gone. Ava slid the phone back into her pocket. Which is why I'm not going alone. The spillway crouched under the bridge like a throat, dark water churning through its mouth. At noon sharp, Ava and Viga walked the embankment, weapons holstered but ready. No one came out. Instead, tucked against the wet concrete was a plastic bag weighed with a brick. Inside lay another cassette tape, this one labeled Fund. Back at the precinct, the tech ran it through. Static filled the room, then a muffled exchange. Cole's gravel voice recognizable even across decades, arguing about risking deputies. Lyndon's calm baritone replying, the fund doesn't run on mercy. The bridge is ours. Another voice, unfamiliar, added, Mr. Charles decides. Viga froze the playback, face pale. So Lyndon isn't Charles. He worked for Charles. Or maybe took his name later. Ava felt her pulse climb. The mystery stretched deeper. An unseen figure, still pulling strings. Still nameless Dot, she left the tape room dizzy with the realization. All along she had thought Lyndon was the architect, but maybe he had been just another brick in a wall that reached higher. That meant Carter and Joey had died because they crossed more than one man. That night, Ava drove out to Cole's cabin. The place sagged under years of neglect, porch light flickering weak. She knocked once, twice. The door creaked open to reveal Cole. Older now, hair gone white, but his eyes still sharp. He studied her badge, then the determination in her face. Should have stayed out, he rasped. This county doesn't bury its dead. It stacks them. Carter and Joey weren't yours to stack, Ava said. Cole coughed, a harsh bark that might have been a laugh. You think you're chasing me? I was a pawn. We all were. Pike made us obey, but it was Charles who decided who lived and died. His gaze slid past her shoulder into the fog. You don't want to meet him. You won't come back. Before she could press further, a shot cracked the night. Wood splintered in the porch beam, inches from Ava's head. She dropped to cover, drawing her weapon. Cole didn't flinch, just sighed. See? He's watching. Always watching. By the time Viga pulled up, lights flashing, the shooter was gone, leaving only footprints vanishing into mud. Cole sat inside, hands trembling, staring at a half-burned ledger. He pushed it across the table to Ava. It's all there, he whispered. Names, payments, nights at the bridge. But if you read it, you'll never sleep again. The ledger pages smelled of smoke and mildew, but the entries were clear enough. Coded initials, dollar figures, dates that matched every missing person report along Route 17 for a decade. Not just Carter and Joey, others, forgotten, paid for. Ava closed the book, her throat raw. This isn't a case anymore, she murmured. It's a graveyard. Cole's eyes glistened. And graveyards don't light their gates disturbed. She left the cabin with the ledger under her arm, fog wrapping around her like wet cloth, the echo of Cole's words clinging harder than the mist. She knew then the fight wasn't against Pike or Lyndon or even Cole. It was against the faceless man who called himself Charles, the one who believed bridges were gates and silence could last forever. But silence had broken, and Ava wasn't going to let it close again. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days, and Red Creek looked like it was drowning in its own secrets. The river swelled high against its banks, tugging at roots, chewing at the edges of the highway, the bridge humming like a live wire above it all. Detective Ava Rourke sat in her car. The ledger Cole had given her resting on the passenger seat, its pages stiff with smoke and mildew. She had read through half of it in the early hours of the morning, each line a nail hammered deeper into the coffin of her county's innocence. The entries stretched across 10 years-coded initials, dollar figures, and words like load, toll, and maintenance scrawled in Pike's sharp handwriting. Next to some entries, a single letter. See, Ava no longer wondered who it stood for. By the time she walked into the courthouse, a fog of exhaustion had burned into a steady fire. She laid the ledger on Carver's desk without ceremony. The DA adjusted his glasses, scanning the pages with growing alarm. "These initials," he said. "Half these people still live here. Some still in office." He swallowed. "You know what happens if this goes public? This county collapses." "This county already collapsed 25 years ago," Ava shot back. "It just pretended not to." She pointed to one date, October 13th, 1997. "That's Carter and Joey." Pike logged a payout 2 days later. "To Lyndon," with a note, "Bridge work completed. This is conspiracy to murder, obstruction, corruption, everything you need to indict." Carver leaned back, rubbing his temple. "If I move too fast, every lawyer in the state will bury us in appeals. We need a living witness." "I have one," Ava said. "Cole." Carver's eyes narrowed. "Cole is poison. The defense will shred him. Then we protect him until he talks." She pushed the ledger closer. "Or we let the dead keep carrying this alone." That night, she and Vega set Cole up in a safe house outside town. The old deputy chain-smoked until his fingers shook. "You don't get it," he told them, staring at the rain dripping from the eaves. "Charles isn't just a man. He's a circle." A chair at the table passed from one to another. Pike worked for him. Lyndon poured for him. I enforced for him. And when one falls, another fills the seat. He flicked ash into a coffee can. The bridge wasn't about Carter and Joey. It was about power. The bridge was their altar. Ava recorded every word, though the tremor in Cole's voice made it feel less like testimony and more like confession. Vega stayed by the window, restless. "If it's a circle," he said, "then who's sitting in the chair now?" Cole's lips twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You already met him. Man in the hat. He's Charles now. A name doesn't die. It just moves." Ava's blood went cold. The faceless figure who had left her motel key, who had whispered in the graying elevator that was the current Charles. Not Lyndon, not Pike. Someone hungrier. Someone watching her every step. Hours later, while Cole dozed on the couch, Ava stepped outside to clear her head. The storm had slowed to a drizzle, the air heavy with the smell of mud. She lit a cigarette, something she hadn't done in years, and stared into the black line of trees at the edge of the property. That's when she saw it, a faint glow, like the cherry of a cigarette, and the silhouette of a man watching. Hat brim low, standing perfectly still. Her hand went to her weapon, but by the time she raised it, the figure was gone. Only the smell of wet leaves remained, and the sound of branches swaying where no wind blew. She didn't sleep. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table with the ledger open, piecing together initials. Some belonged to deputies long dead, others to business owners she still saw in town. And one entry early 2000 had her name scrawled in the margin. She froze, heart slamming. She hadn't even graduated high school then. Why would her name be in Pike's ledger? The line read only, future placement, promising stock, When Cole woke at dawn, she shoved the page in front of him. "Explain this." His eyes flicked over the line, then to her. For once, the old deputy looked afraid. "He knew you," Cole whispered. Charles had lists. Kids from certain families, certain schools. People they could use later. If you rose in the ranks, they'd own you before you knew it. Pike must have spotted you early. Ava's stomach turned. She ripped the page free and stuffed it in her jacket pocket. "Not anymore," she said. By noon, Viga got word the AG was sending federal marshals to escort Cole into protective custody. But when the convoy rolled up the dirt lane, the safe house door swung wide to emptiness. Cigarette butts still smoldered in the coffee can. The couch cushions were warm. Cole was gone. In his place, on the table, lay another note written in thick black marker. "Bridges hold their dead. Circles don't break." Viga cursed, slamming his fist against the wall. Ava just stared at the words, pulse steady in her ears. The circle hadn't just taken Cole. They were sending her a promise. She folded the note, slipped it beside the ledger page with her own name, and whispered to herself, "Then I'll break it the hard way." The wind cut sharp across Red Creek the night the safe house emptied. Detective Ava Rourke stood in the doorway staring at the abandoned couch. The ledger still spread open on the table, and the note that said, "Bridges hold their dead. Circles don't break." It felt less like a threat and more like scripture, the kind of creed whispered over barrels before concrete swallowed them whole. Viga paced the floor, jaw tight, muttering curses. "He didn't walk out on his own," he said. "Cole couldn't even stand up without wheezing. Somebody took him, and they wanted us to know." Ava pocketed the note, her mind already racing ahead. If the circle had Cole, then his testimony would never reach court. They'd silence him the same way they silenced Carter and Joey, only quicker this time. She spent the next day chasing shadows through paper trails. Carver, the DE, had gone quiet, answering calls with clipped one-liners, then cutting the line. Lorraine from Public Works stopped showing up at her desk. Even the clerk at the diner, who usually poured her coffee, wouldn't meet her eyes. It was as if the entire county had leaned back into the silence, waiting for her to vanish like the rest. Ava drove aimlessly at dusk, the ledger pages scattered across her passenger seat, headlights painting the wet asphalt. Every line of it whispered complicity. Initials she recognized from city council, sheriff's deputies now retired with pensions, business owners who sponsored parades. The circle wasn't hidden in shadows. It had lived in plain sight, smiling from parade floats and church pews. Near midnight, her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. This time not a warning, but an invitation. Bridge, 1 o'clock. Come alone. Ava stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. It was reckless, a setup written in neon, but something in her bones said the circle wanted to show itself. Not to talk, but to remind her who was really in control. She texted Viga a single. Wordwatch then left her car in the gravel lot near the old feed mill and walked the rest of the way on foot. The bridge loomed ahead, swallowed in fog, its rails slick with condensation. For a moment, she heard only the rush of the river below, the low moan of wind through steel beams. Then a shadow detached itself from the far end. The man in the hat. Taller up close than she remembered. Lean frame wrapped in a coat that fluttered like a shroud. He didn't hurry, didn't threaten. He simply stood at the center of the span and waited. "You've been looking for Charles," he said when she was close enough to hear. His voice was calm, flat, the same cadence from the tapes. But Charles isn't a man. Charles is a seat. When one dies, another fills it. You think you can indict concrete? Ava kept her hand near her holster. Carter and Joey didn't drown. They were murdered, sealed under your altar. I've got the bones, the tape, the ledger. The circle's finished. He tilted his head, the brim hiding his eyes. Evidence is weightless without will. Carver won't risk it. The state won't fight it. You'll stand alone, and when you fall, the county will keep smiling like nothing happened. That's what bridges are for, to carry weight while people forget what lies beneath. She took a step closer. Then why meet me? Why not just bury me too? His smile was a slash in the fog. Because circles like to test their cracks. You've made it further than Carter, further than Joey, but you're not ready to pay the toll. He tossed something across the damp asphalt. Ava caught it by reflex, a badge, rusted and bent. Carter's, number half scraped away. By the time she looked up, the man had vanished into the mist. No footsteps, no sound, but the rush of water below. She stood alone on the span, badge cold in her palm, the river whispering like it wanted her name too. When Vega arrived 10 minutes later, lights off, he found her leaning against the rail, staring down into the black current. She handed him the badge without speaking. His face hardened. He's playing you. Wants you rattled. Ava shook her head. He wants me to know the circle isn't afraid, which means we're close. Back at her motel, she spread the badge beside the ledger page with her own name scribbled years earlier. Future placement, promising stock. Her reflection in the window looked like a stranger eyes, rimmed in red, hair damp with fog. She wondered if the circle had chosen her before she ever chose this life, if the reason she was chasing them was because, once, she was meant to join them. Sleep came in fits, full of water and voices that told her to stop. When she woke at dawn, another message blinked on her phone. No number, no trace, just 4 words. Midnight, under the bridge. Ava exhaled slow, steady. The circle was calling her to its altar again. This time, she wasn't sure whether she was going as hunter, witness, or sacrifice. Midnight came with a hard wind and a river swollen from 2 days of rain. Ava parked a quarter mile from Carter Bridge, left her phone on the seat streaming live to a cloud account, and slipped a body cam under her jacket. Vega waited in the aisle, dark beyond the tree line. No lights, no radio, only a silent thumbs up when she glanced his way. Below the bridge, the service road curved under the span and ended at the old pylons. That was where the circle liked to meet, out of sight of highway traffic, close enough to hear the tires thrum overhead, far enough that screams folded into water. Ava walked slow, hands visible, breath a thin cloud in the cold. A lantern snapped on near the far pier. 3 figures stepped out too, with their faces shadowed by hats, one bareheaded, Carver. He looked older under the yellow light, sunk-eye, tired, a man whose soul had been in escrow for too long. "Detective," he said, voice steady but thin. "You were told to leave this alone." Ava kept moving until the river sprayed her boots. "And you were elected to fight for it." One of the men lifted a pistol. The other dragged something, forward from the dark. A barrel speckled with concrete dust, stamped with a date from the year Carter and Joey vanished. The bare-headed man, the one who stood too straight, too calm, did not speak yet. He didn't need to. His presence turned the air heavy. When he finally did, the sound was the same measured cadence from the tapes, the same unbroken line from every message. Circles stay circles because they cut their corners. Ava nodded at the barrel. "What's in it?" "History," he said. "We write it in concrete so it doesn't change." He studied her like an equation. "You were supposed to sit in Charles's chair one day. You still could, if you understand the cost." For a heartbeat, she saw the fork in the road, the easier life with her name on a placard and her conscience wrapped in gauze. Then she heard Vega's voice in memory, tired and stubborn. "You don't get to put your head down and hope it passes." She took one step closer. "I brought something too." She raised her hands, palms open to show no gun, and tilted her chin toward the underside of the bridge. The glow grew in the cracks of the concrete, as if the river itself had lit. For a split second, the men flinched, looking up. That was the cue. Floodlights boomed on across the span, white and surgical. Red-blue strobes ignited on both riverbanks. From the shadows near the pylons, state police stepped out in layered armor, rifles up. From the slope above, county boats. Nosed in, motors whisper quiet. From the far abutment, a drone hovered with its camera eye open wide. Viga appeared behind the lantern, shotgun leveled. Hands, now. The gunman swore and swung his barrel, but a laser dot pinned his chest before he could aim. The other man let go of the drum and raised his arms. Carver didn't move. He watched, Ava the way a man watches the tide when he already knows it's carrying him out. The voice from the tapes tonight's Charles laughed once low. You think light kills shadows? It only moves them. He tossed something small at the lantern. It shattered. Darkness tried to swallow the moment, but the floodlights held, and with them the long-delayed gravity of law. On your knees, Vega barked. The gunman obeyed. Charles did not. He slid 1 foot back, heel finding the edge of the pier, body balanced like a diver who had decided to be air. There are always more seats, he said. You can't arrest a circle. No, Ava said, voice even. But you can break it. She nodded at the barrel. Cut it open. 2 troopers dragged it clear and popped the lid. The smell hit first wet iron and lime, then the sight. A crumbling slab, bone threaded through stone. A badge number eaten by time, but still legible. Someone nearby cursed, and then went silent. The camera drone dipped lower. Charles's breath fogged white in the beams. For the first time his eyes moved not to the guns, not to the officers, but to the barrel, to the fact of it. It unstitched something in his face. You should have left them, he whispered. They were already buried. Viga stepped forward, cuffs ready. Turn around. Carver finally spoke, every word soaked in defeat. Charles, don't. But the man was already stepping back. Ava surged in and grabbed his coat. For a heartbeat, they teetered together over the black, the river mouth open beneath. She felt the weight of him, the weight of years. He hissed, You'll take my place or you'll join me. Neither, she said, and wrenched. Viga's hand closed on her belt and pulled her clear as Charles slipped free. He fell without a cry. The water swallowed him like it had been waiting. A trooper threw a line. It floated, useless. The current kept it secret. They cuffed the gunman and the second man. Carver extended his wrists without being asked, eyes on the river, lips moving in some prayer that had no God left in it. When they let him past, Ava said, You can still help the families. Carver gave a brittle smile. Families need monuments more than trials. Trials end. Stone stays. We'll take both, she said. By dawn, the scene looked almost normal. Just a bridge, a cold river, men in uniforms packing up lights. But the normal was new. Divers marked grids downstream. A coroner bagged the relics from the drum with the care of a museum curator. Viga handed Ava a coffee and leaned on the rail beside her. He didn't run, Viga said. He chose the water. They all do, Ava answered. When the ground finally says their names out loud. She watched the first sunlight bend on the current. We'll keep pulling, she added, as long as it takes. Later that week, they stood with families on the shoulder where the highway sighs into river. A granite marker went in under the east railing. Carter Ruiz, Joey Holland, and all who were taken and hidden. You are not in the water. You are in the light. Ava read it twice, then a third time for herself. Reporters asked for quotes. She said nothing. The circle's ledger had become evidence. The barrels had become names. Carver signed a plea and a confession. 2 councilmen resigned. An old deputy packed a suitcase and vanished. People in town said the curse was broken. Others said curses don't break, they wander. At night, when wind cut off the plains and the bridge sang its low steel note, Ava sometimes heard the line anyway, "Bridges hold their dead." She answered out loud every time, "Not anymore." And when the next call came a farmer with a dry well that smelled like gun oil and lychee, and Viga were already in the car, maps marked, lights dark, headed toward the place where circles think they can draw themselves again.